Hello, and welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Jim Stevens, a local author and adventurer, I would almost say. But welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you very much, Steve.
It's great to have you here. I was mentioning earlier, uh, I found one of the books that I had read probably 40 years ago that you had written, and I started reading it again and getting all excited about it and went, I got to get Jim on my show and find out more. Why did he do this? What's going on? But before we get to some of that, let me get some background on your early days. Where did you grow up and how did you end up in Thunder Bay?
Well, I grew up in Perth County in a small town called St. Mary's, Ontario. It's called the Stone Town because of all the limestone rock that a lot of the early buildings were constructed of. And was raised on a farm just outside of the town. And my dad was a Holstein farmer and a mink rancher.
No kidding.
And so I lived a very rural, barefooted, run around kind of life as a kid. And along the way, I played a lot of hockey on the Thames River and eventually on a junior B team. And by the time I was 18, I ended up on a hockey scholarship at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York.
Aha!
So that was a bit of an awakening to, end up in staying in a fraternity where some of the lads in the fraternity their dad was like the president of Campbell's Soup, and they drove Corvettes to school. And
my first roommate at university had a Corvette, and I couldn't believe it. Oh my God!
So I was there for 4 years, and then I coached a freshman hockey team. I had Ken Dryden as my goaltender, so I was a very successful coach.
No kidding. That's all you need is Ken Dryden.
And upon graduation in a Master's of Arts program in English History and Student Personnel Administration, I ended up teaching in Red Lake, Ontario.
Whoa, from Ithaca, New York up to Red Lake.
That's right.
So that would have been what, in the late 60s or?
That was 1967.
Okay.
And when I just remember before going up to Red Lake, I was in London, Ontario in a bookstore because my advisor in the master's program told me I should be a writer from the papers I handed in. And I thought, yeah, really. But anyway, I was in this bookstore, and lo and behold, there was a book there called Legends of My People by Norval Morrisseau. And I bought a copy.
Oh, yeah.
And little did I know that I was going to Red Lake, that I would actually meet Norval. And of course, one of his buddies at the time was Carl Ray, who was also a woodland artist.
And so this is the same Norval Morrisseau who is really the father of woodland art, so to speak.
That's correct. He was the breakthrough artist originally from Beardmore, Ontario, and had married Harriet Kakagamick, who was from Sandy Lake. And Norval ended up in Red Lake in the early days working in the Koshner-Willems gold mine. Not that he was much of a miner, I don't think.
he had his heart in a different place, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. And so anyway, that started my interest in the whole woodland art movement, because there was a number of native artists sort of coming on the fore at that time. There was Jackson Beardy in Winnipeg, and Carl Ray, and Norval, and Roy Thomas, and Daphne Ojic, who was at that time living in Winnipeg. And so one of the things that occurred to me when I was teaching as an English teacher and a phys ed teacher in the Red Lake District High School, the Native kids had nothing in the library in terms of their own culture or books or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up partnering with Carl Ray to do a book on the legends and myths from his home reserve up at Sandy Lake. And that led to the Sacred Legends book.
Right. So is this your first book?
Yes, basically the first book. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of your natural interest in history and literature and chance meetings?
Yeah, when I was in my graduate program and my undergraduate program, I focused on Russian history as well as English history.
Okay.
And so, you know, the sort of legendary history of Sandy Lake quite appealed to me. And plus the fact that there would now be a book that dealt with the legends as to how they were actually being told. Whereas previously, a lot of the books that dealt with Canadian legends were purified to keep out any sexual orientation in the books. And of course, in Native culture, sexual episodes were viewed as strictly as humorous events. So anyway, unbeknownst to me at the time, when I sent the manuscript into McClellan and Stewart, it was I would find out years later that they turned around and they sent the book, the manuscript, to Angus Mowat, who is Farley Mowat's father.
Oh, yes.
And as I said, years later, Angus Mowat gave me the letter that he wrote to Jack McClellan about the manuscript. And there was only one sentence in the letter. It said, "Dear Jack, you must publish this."
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You're connected with all kinds of folks in history. We're just going to need to take a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.